Oh my gosh, it is Friday, July 23rd, Megan. It was a big, big day on The View. Um, I think we opened talking about the Olympics. And the question was, should we be having the Olympics in the middle of a pandemic? And shouldn't the athletes have been required to be vaccinated? Um, are we putting people at risk? Um, and you somehow turned that into, uh, oh, poor me, I can't go to the Bahamas on vacation because it's really hard to travel. Not really the topic. And do you know how spoiled it makes you sound? Uh, you can travel. There are restrictions and there are considerations, but you can get out and about and do it safely. Um, but you're just going to complain and whine about, I'm sure, mask mandates and having to get tested even though you're vaccinated. Blah blah blah. So anyway, the Olympics, yeah, they probably should have required all the athletes to get vaccinated. If they're going to put them in a bubble, then they need to be protective of that bubble, and they need to make sure that everyone who comes into the bubble doesn't have COVID, uh, and they should have all been vaccinated. But the International Olympic Committee isn't always the best at making the right decision for the athletes. It's usually never about the athletes. But no matter, you're not going to the Olympics because you don't want to travel and you're scared. But that's fine. Then we move on to the shootings in DC. There have been a couple of pretty high profile ones over the last couple of weeks. I noticed that none of your colleagues said, oh my God, DC is a hellscape. Everybody should leave. It's really dangerous. Crime's going up. DC is terrible. Nobody did all that. Like you like to do about New York City and the state of California, which you did bring up in this whole thing that, your colleagues said wonderfully thoughtful things about how difficult the problem of gun violence is in this country. And you reduced it all down to just you're worried about crime. And part of your way to feel better about the crime statistics is to have more people have guns, which is just logic I will never understand. And I heard you don't want to be lectured to by people who didn't grow up in gun culture. And I'm not lecturing. You can't discern the difference between lecturing and having a discussion with differing opinions. But it just seems to me that the protection of the Second Amendment at all costs isn't really the answer. You enjoy, understanding and telling people to appreciate the nuance of a situation. This one has a whole lot of factors that go into it. When it's stated by a couple of your colleagues that this gun epidemic and violence is happening across the country, you have to bring it back to, yeah, but people are leaving New York and California and they're moving to other places so they can have guns. I don't really think that's why people are moving. I don't think that's the primary reason that people are moving to those places so that they can have a gun. But we'll have to do a study on that and wait for Politico to publish it to find out. And then you go on a rant about how you are basically a one-issue voter and you will never vote for anyone who doesn't fully uphold the Second Amendment because it's the cornerstone of this country, which, by the way, no, it's not. And I don't understand the argument about you can't touch any of my guns. We all know the argument. When the Second Amendment was written, we didn't have automatic weapons. We didn't even have fucking pistols. It was muskets. And did they even have a rifle yet? So your insistence upon everyone being able to carry any guns that they want is really antithetical to being concerned about crime. And we'll get to that in a second, because the next thing that we talked about was the the Catholic priest who was part of the cabal that tried to get President Biden, to eliminate his ability to take communion. He was caught with the fact that he had downloaded Grindr on his phone, which is I like that they call it a gay dating app. It's for hookups. It's just a sex app. You might as well just call it what it is. Although Sonny would probably have to have a legal note if you did that. You tell a story about how when, some priest who handed you your diploma, and then after he handed you your diploma, as if that was the only diploma he handed out that day, he then went and murdered somebody with his car and then tried to clean it out at a car washing station, and how traumatic that was for you. I think it was probably pretty traumatic for the person that he killed and their family. And talking about how just because there's some bad priests, you can't say anything about the doctrine or the institution. But here's where you're wrong. There is something wrong with the doctrine in the way that they define how a priest can live, because it clearly denies people natural human instincts and behaviors. And you can definitely blame the institution, because all of those priests and all of those parishes who abused children sexually, mentally, physically, the ones who murdered children and covered it up, and then the institution just sort of shifted people around. There was never any accountability within the system for any of that sexual abuse that happened. No priest, no nun was ever held accountable until it became too much in recent history. And you absolutely can blame the institution for that. And you can't say the institution isn't bad when there's just some bad actors in it, when the institution protects the bad actors. It's the same argument with the police. If the police themselves are going to continue to uphold the bad apples, then the police force is complicit in the actions of those bad apples. And this now goes back to the gun argument. You can't say the Second Amendment covers everyone to have any gun they want. You have to be able to say, you know what? Some of you shouldn't really be partaking in this particular activity. And that's really what the whole common sense gun laws is about making sure that guns aren't easily obtainable in the hands of the wrong people, and that people know how to use them, and that there is proper training. And it's such a simple argument and so basic, and makes so much common sense when people say you need a license and insurance to have a car. Can't you just apply the same thing to a gun and a registration so we know where they are? Because nobody's going to come trying to take them. No, does anybody come and try to steal your car from you? Unless you don't make the payments, then yeah, someone's going to take your car away. But so that whole argument, and it seems to be really big in the Republican Party, is that it's a rule. So it's a rule for everyone, and we're just going to blanket it, and it's all good. We're tribaling together and we're going to protect the bad ones to make sure that we uphold our principles. And it's just not the way it works. And it is more nuanced than that. And there's more consideration than just, I have a right to have a gun. And you said, this recent shooting, which from what I saw seemed to be very targeted. And there was a shooting and a retaliation that seemed, but I don't know what happened. You said every American should be scared because it happened 2 blocks from the White House. So that's a great way to, instill fear in people. Everyone should be scared. But I'll tell you what, I don't think people that are, more than a few miles away from the White House are really scared by that statistic or that fact. The White House is pretty heavily guarded. So, I don't think Joe Biden being 2 blocks away in one of the most protected houses in the world was really in any danger. And most people, when they hear about gun violence someplace else, don't necessarily feel afraid for themselves. It's when it happens close to home. And I was surprised that you even had the discussion, because you usually like to say you don't want to talk about gun violence after a gun violence event. But I don't think anyone died in this one, so then it's okay to talk about. But what if we just talk about gun violence, next week, like on Wednesday? Can we do that? Is it okay to talk about, what is rational thinking about the Second Amendment on Wednesday if there's no, violent gun happening? The likelihood of that is low, but there's got to be a day that we can talk about it. But I doubt that'll ever come, because the stance you have is absolute, and there's no way to make a compromise with that. Again, another trait of you delightful, hypocritical Republicans. And the last thing we talked about today was the woman who left an Orthodox Jewish community to seek her own independence and have her own career, basically her own life. And of course, you turn that into, aren't you making a show that's anti-Semitic? The entire time, in every answer she gave, she said, this is about independence. This is not about religion. It's about independence. She said it over and over and over again. And you still stick to that question, to which she had to repeat, it's about independence. But you can't possibly imagine that if someone no longer wants to be associated with a certain part of their life, or no longer wants to identify with that part of their life, they can't possibly absolutely and 100% hate that thing. Because for you, if you're going to leave something behind, there's got to be an element of hate. So I look forward to the tell-all book deal you get to spill your secrets from The View, even though you hate tell-alls. I have a feeling there's one in the near future. And we found out you're here until August 9th. That's a whole extra week that we get to kick you around.